All right. I am here with Avi, who I met, what, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that.
2018. That sound
Yeah,
right?
2018
Yeah.
at Dancing Rabbit Eco Village, which I believe was the first intentional community that I had ever visited. And I remember I read Tribe by Sebastian Junger and Lost Connections by Johann Hari and was really inspired by intentional community living. And somehow I came across Dancing Rabbit, I think through a Google search. And I went for a 2 week apprentice visitor program type of thing. And Avi was there and we met. And then we fell out of contact for a bunch of years, and then you just reached back out not too long ago and reconnected. And yeah, it's been fun to track our journeys as they've unfolded. And you saw one of my recent Substack articles called "The Language of Belonging," which is around different names and labels for different types of collective projects and the different ways that we might be able to relate to those um, yeah, different shapes of community and belonging that can help us both attune to maybe what we're deeply longing for and also to create healthy distinctions that can allow us to maybe hmm. Actually, I'm trying to what's happening right now is that I'm trying to reconnect with the impulse to create the article. And the impulse for me started with this sense of hearing people use many different words to describe what I think was a similar thing, but the words were really ranging from, a group of 5 people that were called a village, or a group of 100 people that were called a family, and just sensing that, like, some of these words are actually, in my experience, they're pointing to very specific types of relationships that have a very specific quality, a specific unique bond that bring people together. And I wonder if there's a way for me to just offer my sense of these different words, the distinctions that I make for myself, so that maybe we can have a little bit more of a shared language in the network and basically have a better understanding of what we're talking about. So if we're really looking for being a part of a community, but not wanting to necessarily show up for everything and be kind of committed to it long term, we can call that more of a collective. And if we really want to, be responsible for one another in a deep bond, we can call that more of a community. And so there's many different terms that I wrote in this Substack article. It just kind of poured out of me one morning, and you invited me to have a conversation about it. And so here we are.
Perfect introduction. Yeah. I was laughing a little bit because you were talking about us meeting in 2018 at Dancing Rabbit and some of the cultural influences that landed you to visit there. Um, and I'm like, oh, here we are 8 years later, and I'm checking with myself, like, how much more do I really feel like I even know or understand about, creating some of these di different alternative uh, shapes of belonging that we're exploring in this conversation. And it's like I've gathered some data and then also showing up just with so many questions and sorting through um, how I relate to many of the distinctions that you were drawing in that article. And I find it really helpful to look at because I'm aware of the way that my shadow can negatively impact my sense of belonging in these different shapes when there are needs that I'm not maybe consciously aware of or expectations that I'm bringing to a space, and not sort of seeing it or treating it for what it is and creating that common knowledge with people in the group about what it is that we're doing together. So for example, showing up to using language from your article, a collective space with community expectations or a community space with Sangha expectations, um, and trying to map out, some of the groups that I'm a part of and that I'm forming and, on what level am I working for which of my own needs and which needs in other people am I consenting to be available for and show up for? And that feels really profoundly important to me, in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I think what I'm hearing in both of what we're sharing is around boundaries, healthy boundaries that can help us attune to our own needs as well as to right relationship with the the groups, the collectives that we're showing up in and becoming a part of. And yeah, I'm just thinking about so many of the gatherings that I've organized and hosted, and often people come into the collective stew, into the gathering with so many different conscious and unconscious projections and desires and longings. And one time we actually, for the constructing consciousness, we wrote out a big list of all the subtle stories and projections that we hear people that we've heard past participants put onto the project. And that's not to make any of them wrong. And in fact, actually, a diversity of longings and needs can make a community experience really rich and people can discover their own needs that maybe they weren't even aware of through the needs of another. But also, sometimes when there's so much divergence, it can stretch and pull a community in many different directions, and it can create a sense of yeah, a sense of like spending more time trying to determine what and how the group is and what it wants to be together, and less time actually in the deep experience of just the intimacy of what it might be if it were to take a particular shape and stand for that, and kind of know where where its edges begin to blur into other shapes that might be arising in different types of containers. So yeah, I guess I just want to caveat everything we're saying that while we're talking about boundaries and stuff, usually there's not hard distinctions and clear lines and delineations between any of these things. But also, when we bring language to it, it can create a sense of clarity that actually I found sometimes can allow me to relax into a space because I have a sense of knowing where its edges are, so to speak, and I can play more freely within the story that we're collectively living into together.
That's very resonant for me. And a question that arises for me is, how do you experience holding the relationship or balance between the sense of boundary and expectation setting that you're speaking to right now and emergence or potential evolution of our relationships to one another, um, in any number of vectors that may transcend some of those boundaries uh, that could be outlined or made explicit.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm wondering for folks who might not have come across the article, maybe it would be helpful just to give a brief overview of some of the terminology, and then we can
I think
dive
your
in.
instinct's right on. Let's do that.
Okay. Yeah, so basically, I just mapped out several different terms that often get used in the broader conscious community and the broader meta-modern movement and the more beautiful world culture that is coming online. And so some of the terms are network, movement, collective, scene, community, tribe, guild, village, bioregion, and archipelago. And I also added at the end Sangha and a network of networks. So maybe I'll just briefly, there's a glossary and I'll just read the glossary. And if you're interested in learning, I mean, we might get into this in the conversation, but if you're interested in really going through and reading my detailed descriptions of each of these, please check out the Substack article. But how I define a network is shared resonance across distance. So usually I experience a network as being decentralized. It's something that is existing across time and space in a number of places, and it's maybe not as consolidated, but it can be constellated as through shared knowing of the different nodes of that network that unify it into a whole, which we can call a network. And then a movement is something that is has a directionality, it has a mission, an explicit mission to it. So you can think of like the civil rights movement, or um, we could even talk about it as like a climate change movement, where usually there's a group of people that are coming together for a shared agenda they might be very diverse. They might be made up of many different collectives, many different organizations, but there's a sense of a shared mission that unites those folks. A collective. So this is a word. Collective is sometimes used as a catch-all for all of these words, and I think that that's fine as well. But how I'm defining collective in the context of this article is a group of folks who are a part of a collective. So, for example, I started the Constructing Consciousness Collective as one of the co-organizers, co-founders of that. And this is a group of people who are located all over the world. And many of them know each other, but some of them don't know each other. Many of them have been to in-person gatherings, but not all of them have been to all of the in-person gatherings. And so I describe it as there's a common cause or a common uniting force to a collective, but there's looser bonds. Now, some people might be best friends within a collective, but you don't need to be personal friends or personal colleagues with people in a collective. The bonds can be a bit looser, a bit more, um, yeah, a bit more spread. Now, a scene is sometimes I refer to the conscious community scene. So here in Boulder, for example, there's also like a Burning Man scene. And these are folks that have a shared, maybe an identity or a sense of aesthetics. Maybe there's a cultural sensibility that they feel resonance with, and they might show up at similar types of events or gatherings, or they might be drawn to similar, festivals, for example, or similar conferences, but they're not necessarily a collective. They're not unified as a particular organization or a particular structure. And they're not necessarily all friends. But they might recognize each other. Like the Grateful Dead. My mom, my mom is a Deadhead, and you can just kind of feel the scene, the vibe of Deadheads, and they share this sensibility, but they're not necessarily all linked in a formal sense. Now, a community. So again, community is a catch-all word, but how I'm using it in this particular article is around having shared commitment with real accountability. So a community is when you're a part of an organized group, and the group knows that you're a part of it, you know that you're a part of it, and there's some accountability for how you show up. There's expectations, and whether those are implicit or explicit, and there's a recognition that you need to kind of give to that community in order for the community to thrive. So this is usually it's more the bonds are more intimate. Often there's more explicit friendships. There's more intimacy and relatedness than say a collective, which can be a bit more loose. So a tribe is a word that gets used in so many different contexts, and I'm definitely not in this sense meaning it in the indigenous use of this word. I'm using it more how folks in maybe the broader conscious community framing might use the word tribe. And how I call that is a shared identity at the level of being. So there's only a few folks in my life that I feel like are a part of my tribe. And one way that I sometimes tell the story about that is that it's almost like our soul has the same tattoo. Like there's like there's a felt sense that this person is family to me. Now, we might not have, daily contact. They might not live in the same town as me. It might not be, again, tribe and that kind of indigenous place-based meaning of the word. But there's a sense of tribe, of a deep belonging that is beyond the personality level. There's some deeper current in that person where you feel at home in them and vice versa. Okay, we're getting through the list. A
You're doing
guild.
great.
A guild. A guild is yeah, so right now I'm starting the Source Keepers Guild with my creative partner Cheryl Shu. And a guild is it's more from maybe traditional culture around having a shared craft, having vocational devotion. So I'm also a member of the Directors Guild, which is for filmmakers. And this is a group of film directors that all are invited to shared events. We're all, offered health insurance under the guild. We have certain, perks that are being a part of this. And so but primarily we're oriented around our craft and our vocation. So village, again, village is a word where a lot of times people sometimes use it like a noun. Oh, we're villaging. And I think that's really important is learning right now in our culture coming up moving through and into a different expression after modernism, there's a sense of how do we re-village together? And how I am defining village in this context as being place-based and revolving around a shared life. So daily life is being lived together on land. Now, it might not mean that you share the same roof as that person, but maybe you're in the same walking distance, you could say, from people that you know well and that you feel that you are all serving the village. Like you don't just live in a village like you might live in a suburban neighborhood. You contribute to the village. You are the village. The village is fundamentally a part of the wholeness of your life. There's a lot more to say on that, but bioregion. So a bioregion, as I define it, is a shared ecosystem. So it might be a broader area of land. Sometimes those bioregions are marked through rivers or certain boundaries and borders that are ecological, that have a similar ecological temperament, you could say. And maybe there's many villages or there's towns and cities and villages all within a same bioregion. But the idea is that you're collectively oriented towards the ecosystem that you are a part of. Okay, and then finally, archipelago. So an archipelago, this is maybe the most unique one that's less often used, but I'm hearing it more and more. It's a little bit related to a network of networks. And the idea is that as more and more folks are oriented towards community living, towards collective life and this new culture that's emerging, there's these pockets of places around the planet that are not maybe all officially networked together, but there's some sort of shared resonance and shared awareness of the pockets that are existing as these different nodes. And the nodes kind of represent a meta node, you could say, that is like an island that is a part of the larger archipelago of other islands that are arising of shared nodes that exist throughout the planet. And so it's almost like these islands arise and they each have a lighthouse and they're each beaming out and they can kind of begin to recognize each other like shooting stars in the sky or like constellations in the stars. And there's this is how a broader cultural movement is created. As at first it's maybe a one little node or one human even, and then it slowly builds, and then other nodes that are similar but have maybe their own distinctions begin to arise, and then those nodes begin to kind of pocket together into networks, and then those networks become, meta nodes that begin to recognize themselves as part of a larger decentralized movement that can also then coordinate at that level and scale. And then, yeah, maybe the last one I'll share is Sangha, which Sangha tends to be like a guild. There's a shared craft in a Sangha, and that craft is maybe around awakening or spiritual practice. Sangha is a word derived from Buddhism, but people use it more broadly to speak around, yeah, transformational containers that are usually lineage oriented and are explicitly working towards a level of, you could say, spiritual attainment, perhaps. Okay, that's a lot, but what do you think?
I think it's super, super rich, and there's so many different threads that I'm looking forward to pulling on with you. So I really appreciate the work that you've done to map all of that out. And I'll add a little more context and bring us back to the question I asked you before you listed that out for our mutual reference. Um, so I'm holding a space called Soul Community Lab, which is a internet, virtual space that meets on Zoom. And I'm going to try to use my language accurately to what you've listed out here. It's a collective of folks who are all wanting to build more soul community, conscious community, community connections in their life. And so for me, looking at this list, I self-identify as working to co-create many things on that list at many different levels. There's also folks I'm living with on land here. Um, I'm part of a small town. I live outside of Fairfield, Iowa, and we often use the terms community, to talk about people in Fairfield or in a sort of the meditation community is a term that gets thrown around. And I feel like there's a lot of deep that's my experience of it. There really is a strong community here, although I'd like to investigate that word more against these definitions. So anyway, I'm invested in co-creating and contributing to these things, and so I've just found it so helpful to bounce my awareness off of this because, especially as somebody holding space, I have a responsibility to define what the space is about and separate out like my needs or what I'm working on from that of the space. It's like, what work am I doing to hold the space? And then what work am I doing within the space as a participant? And those aren't necessarily the same things. So my sense is that all the different humans that are out there doing that who we're connected to and beyond may benefit a lot from the same kind of thought exercise and kind of thinking this through in a conscious way. So I wanted to add that and then open it back up for the balance of, holding space or trying to create these things and using this explicit edge setting, boundary setting framework that's so important, especially for those of us, I'm going to switch into source language that are global sources for something where really you are responsible for defining what it's going to be. And yet there's a dialectic in that and kind of a co-creative emergence in that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I got a phone call, so apologies about the ringing in the background. Yeah. What I'm thinking about right now is just my own journey. I'd be curious to map your journey as well if that comes through. But in 2020, so a couple years after we met during the start of COVID, I heard about this organization called or this YouTube channel essentially called the Stoa. And the Stoa, and then there was Rebel Wisdom, and then there was the Emerge podcast, and there was this scene of people that were coming to these different calls and were sharing some of these different links online. and they weren't really coordinated. It was more just like popcorn, you have people popping up that are resonating with some of the messaging and the storytelling that's happening. We also see this in the regenerative village movement or scene, where there's this shared sensibility of a way of life that is not yet here, but we are longing towards it, but we are also prototyping and practicing it moment by moment. And then what happened for me was that I began to keep seeing familiar faces, and eventually groups would come up, like an online group, or I started constructing consciousness. And it was inviting people to come to in-person gatherings or to come to online Zoom calls. And these are people that I recognized from the scene, or I knew about their names, but I wanted to bring them a little bit closer to my heart, essentially. And so these collectives started to pop up. And still, when people were showing up, not everyone knew each other. Some deep friendships would happen, but also a lot of them were looser bonds. And then there was a sense that a lot of folks are kind of traveling or going to these different online and in-person gatherings, and there's a little bit more of a sense of belonging, but that what people are really looking for is more of a community, which is more to be a part of something where there's a more depth and a tightness of bonds that are durable and are moving through time and space and increasing in their capacity to deepen together. And so I created the Boulder Lighthouse. I called it the Boulder Lighthouse Collective, but it actually should be called the Boulder Lighthouse Community because it was a group of about 8 to 12 of us that met for 3 years. We had, I think, 7 in-person retreats, and it was a very tightly knit, curated group. We all became very close friends, and we really deepened together over time. We were invested in our friendships. We were invested in our relationships together. And from that, there was a few people from that community where I felt like, these people are like they're all a part of my tribe in the sense that we're all kind of traveling together as on our soul journeys, you could say. But there was a couple people in particular where I felt like, well, they're from the same soul lineage as I am. Now, I don't really have the best language to describe that. It's really a felt sense of feeling like there there's a deeper connection here that I have with a few folks that is not about whether I like them on a personality level. It's about some sort of soul resonance that is it's not something that really can I don't think can be created. It's more like something that's just kind of there or not. And with a couple of those people, I ended up starting a guild. And a guild is like, okay, we've had the experience of community bonds. We're a part of a broader collective. We recognize ourselves as part of a scene, and that scene also has an element of a movement that is wanting to go somewhere. How can we get there and invite more people into deeper belonging so that we can have both more beautiful friendships and relationships in our lives, but also help culture build? And that's when this guild was created with my creative partner Cheryl and with others. And it was a sense of helping, like vowing to be in relationship with our soul expression, with our unique offerings and gifts and dharma in the world, and recognizing that our success is intricately interdependent on the flourishing of each other because we're all part of global this global culture that's emerging, and you can't have a culture when just one part of it, like the education system, is flourishing, but all the other systems are and crumble. So we need each other to be whole and full and alive and flourishing to really bring a more beautiful world forward, inshallah. And my
Inshallah.
intent, my intention with the guild is that I'll meet different people who are ready or who desiring to live in place-based village that want to actually move onto land or join an existing community and really root for with the intention of decades of starting families or raising families and growing old in a shared piece of land where we can really bring all of this that's happening on a planetary scale, and it's almost like embody it down into the roots of our place-based being. Um, and so that's just a little bit about my journey moving through different shapes of belonging as different chapters of my life have unfolded. And in a way, it's a little bit like a toroid. It's toroidal in the sense that the deeper I go into intimacy and to depth of relationship, the more it also expands out into wanting to help participate in a larger movement that is far beyond the individual relationships.
Profound. Yeah. Um, what I'm experiencing is something I hoped would happen on this call, which is sort of rooting um, the abstracted map into our direct lived experience. And um, what I heard from listening to you was getting involved in different spaces that had different containers set, and then other things emerging, and then more spaces and more containers being set for other levels of belonging or connecting with different folks. And that really resonates with me. And again, something that I think as I work on making my unconscious conscious and being aware more of my shadow of what I'm bringing to different containers and groups of people, um, there's this just being there's an opportunity to be more intentional and conscious of like which level am I working at with which people at which time, and how the keeping it kind of clear and delineated um, enables more impactful and fulfilling work at that level.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, in practice, I don't know how much I think about these distinctions, but it's more like the distinctions. I think what's helpful about all maps or models or language in general is that they can create patterns and distinctions that we can conceptually know, but then over time we it's almost like it sinks into our the cells of our body, and then we can just sense and feel and intuit those distinctions when they're supportive. And we don't necessarily need to draw on the conceptual frameworks as much because we can feel it's almost like if total relative union is at the very center, and then there's these concentric circles that go out where maybe there's a at the furthest concentric circle there's a sense of total separation from another. And there's like these different depths of intimacy and connection. Now I'm talking on a relative level. We could take a non-dual perspective, and that's a whole other thing. But just on a relative human level, there's a sense of like the depth of belonging and the tightness of the bonds that are being created. And that's to me that I feel that in my heart even more than I feel that in my mind. Um, yeah, yeah.
Glad you brought that. I'm finding that you're speaking to a number of questions that I had or wanted to touch on together. And one was that I've noticed it seems to me that the meta modern community, and I'm looking at this and speaking about this as an outsider to that community. So my perception is not necessarily reality, but
Sure.
some of the perception I have is that there's a strong focus on language and mapping.
Mhm.
And I've had somewhat of an aversion to that at times, due in part to what you're describing here of just how, the abstraction, the map is not the territory, and our felt sense is really the
Mhm.
reality that matters to us.
Yeah.
And yet, what I'm also thinking about here is the stages of learning something ranging from unconscious incompetence through conscious incompetence to conscious competence and then unconscious competence.
Mhm.
And what I heard you speaking to was, while we're in this conscious competence stage, these maps and terms and language, it's really helpful. And then we can sort of move into the next level where we have it in our body, we embody it, we can disinhibit some of the mind stuff that's going on and just sort of live into it. And that feels really relevant to me because I have this sense that, speaking for myself, I didn't grow up in a cultural environment where belonging was I didn't experience a deep sense of belonging throughout most of my life, in the way that I grew up, both in family dynamics and then broader community and societal dynamics and even civic, where I grew up. And so I feel like I'm learning. I'm trying to I know that I have these needs that are unmet, and
Yeah.
yet I'm bringing my conditioning and all the patterns to that process and trying to learn how to be able to show up and fulfill these desires and needs, um, in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so much I could share in response to that. It brings up a lot. Hmm. Yeah, one I feel like there's different paths. There's many people, thousands, maybe millions of folks who hold this collective vision of place-based village living. Now that might not mean that everyone is just living in one village for the rest of their lives and they don't, travel anymore. There's also the idea of having a network of villages across the planet that maybe share a similar ethos that people spend different seasons or moments in. But my point is that some folks are immediately going to buying land and then kind of learning how to live in relationship and culture build once they're on the land together. And that's I think a higher bar. Um, it's a braver path perhaps, and something that I've seen and am learning from, and maybe just my life has unfolded in this direction organically is to practice relationship and to practice essentially uh, loving more fully, but with more attunement and also in right relationship to the particular context of our times and the emerging culture through more um, through containers that aren't as long-term place-based as say a village would be. So it's an hour-long Zoom call practicing, authentic relating and then doing, that was um yeah. I'm not I'm not saying that okay, wait. I'm gonna pause for a moment. My my hope is that yeah, my hope is that a culture can be created and steeped in and embodied like healthy soil in a garden through different explorations and different shapes of belonging that could range from the list that we've been talking about of terms. And that in my own journey, being able to dance and to explore and to prototype and to help create and to help steward and show up for some of these different types of collectives of communities has been it's helped to create more wholeness in my being, and I think it's helped to create more wholeness in the friendships and the relationships and that I'm tending to, and that I feel responsible for on some level. And that if and when reality decides that it's the right time to live on land with other folks, hopefully all of these experiences can help create again like healthier soil for the sprouting of that project. Now, that doesn't mean it won't be filled with tons of challenges and that it won't be bringing on a whole nother spiral rung or two or three of initiations that come with that. But potentially there'll be less of a learning curve, or there'll be less of a leap to make. So yeah, that's my hope. But I also see this as a multi-generational project, and in a way, it's an evolutionary project that maybe never ends. But there's a particular way I can show up for my piece of it in this moment in time, and yeah.
I really resonate with what you're pointing to there, or at least my understanding of some of what you're pointing to there in my own journey as somebody who spent a lot of time in intentional community and went from um how do I want to describe the mainstream culture. I mean, I was just out of college, working my first professional job as a sports writer at that time of my life as a 22-year-old and living in Florida. Had a big crisis and spiritual awakening type of moment and dropped everything and like made a huge shift and exited stage left, on my life at that time. And that that was definitely my path, and I think that's a number of folks the path that a number of folks will take just in terms of I was not so inclined to look at things on a 5 or 10 year time horizon and be like, how do I make my work life work in this setting enough and start to experiment over here and then gradually like switch lifestyles over time, which I see a lot of wisdom. And I think mostly why I couldn't do that is because I didn't have the maturity at that time to be able to manage my life in that way.
Mhm.
I was very dependent on the system that I was in for lack of maybe life skill development or emotional intelligence that I had at that point in my life. And so I hard shifted to, quite frankly, dependence on what I hoped would be a healthier system and was for me at that time. So it was very life-saving, that change that I made in a number of ways. And I felt that I did all this growing up in my early 20s and 20s in general in these different communities where
Mhm.
suddenly there was shared commitment. I was accountable. I was getting feedback um, from other people in this way that I wasn't in the culture that I came from. And I was given freedom and trust to like try things and fail.
Mhm.
So I really needed that, and I'm appreciating feeling the gratitude and perspective as I'm speaking about this for that part of my path. And there's also this other component to it that you're describing of moving into really close, interdependent relationship with one another in these types of land-based village intentional community situations and how that's maybe not always the most sustainable or it could be a higher risk move, and it's good to just know that and share that experience, I think, with others because, in many of these places that we love and that we've been to, they're very transitory or there's high turnover, and they often don't become places where people maybe root in and spend their whole life there. There's a small portion of the community that occupies that space, but people are regularly moving in and out of the container to do whatever developmental stuff that they came there for and then move on once that's been fulfilled.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. One way that we could look at all of these different forms and all forms of reality, you could say, is as a developmental catalyst. And so a form arises, it constellates a particular group of souls, and those souls go through a developmental journey with that form, and then the form dissolves or the souls leave and new souls come through. And so it's like whether it's a village or whether it's an online Zoom call or whether it's a WhatsApp group or whether it's a part of a decentralized planetary movement. None of that matters quite as much from a certain view as the the impact that shape or that form is having on life. What is the good, the true, the beautiful that is emerging in that particular form, in that shape? Is it serving life? Is it creating something beautiful and meaningful? Is it adding real value that people can just know in their bones as being true because they had the direct experience of it? And so, yeah, for me, we could take the perspective that just everything is intimacy, and intimacy is just like this infinitely shape-shifting mystery that takes on many different flavors and forms. And when we can remain in touch with intimacy itself as the universal kind of saturation of all of these different distinctions, then that can be a really beautiful way to swim through many different relative expressions of that intimacy without becoming, um, yeah, without overly attaching to the idea that that form itself is what is. Uh, it's like the intimacy that is found in that particular expression can dissolve back into the intimacy that's always here. And maybe that form is just a reminder, or a guide that is bringing us back home to that deeper sense of belonging that's never left us. And from that place, I find it's a bit paradoxical. There's almost more devotion and more celebration and more desire to create and participate in the construction of these beautiful forms, because they're like art, and they're like ways of expressing the divine play, and then they have real impact on real people, including myself.
Very beautiful. Yeah. Um, Something I'm thinking about is yeah, I'm curious how this maps to your experience, and I also definitely want to spend time on place-based village exploration with you because that's something that but we share an interest in. We met in a place that was an expression of that,
Hmm.
and so I'm really curious to get more into that. But something that came up for me here, I've embedded myself in a lot of different communities or villages or
In the
those are
military as well, right? You were in the military?
yep, I was in the military as well, which
I
is
would be curious. That could be a whole other unique category.
totally yeah, what is the military? I think it is a community of sorts.
Mm-hmm.
Um and and I've moved around a lot. I've left a lot of places, and one of my Sufi teachers, one of the one of the recurring themes of our work with him is learning how to say goodbye well in
Mm.
life. And I'm noticing some like grief and or identification of a growth edge, for myself and some of the spaces involved in where there's an opportunity for partings really to be seen as a celebration of developmental fulfillment.
Mm.
Um, and some of the needs for, I don't know, stability of connection or tribe or um and then maybe just sort of like hopes or projections into the future fantasies of like not only what this relationship is in the moment, but what it could be moving forward tend to obscure and create a flavor of saying goodbye that I found in my own experience and seen a lot with other people where, in some places it's like very rare that people leave or move on from a community or intentional community on good terms,
Mhm.
or with like a good sense of, still being still maintaining intimacy throughout that process.
Yeah.
And so I think I'm just feeling into that and kind of both grieving and seeing the opportunity there.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm. I imagine on some level that when we come so close to contacting something that we long for so deeply, and then it doesn't work out for whatever reason, um, that there's a lot of heartbreak there, and um, that it can be challenging to stay in relationship with a broken heart. Um, and so, there's different strategies that our younger parts have for dealing with that, from resentment or, avoidance, or um, all sorts of things. And yeah, I definitely have had a broken heart from some really meaningful friendships in some of these different communities. And yeah, to my surprise, it's not surprising on a meta level, in the sense that, this happens in human relationships and it's universal to some degree, but surprising in the particularities of the specific relationships where there was just a rupture that couldn't be repaired, or had to be repaired on a more esoteric level outside of the physical contact with the person. And it's rare. It's just, a small number of instances where that's happened, but it's been very humbling. And I think it's why I'm still devoted to, um, well, I was gonna say, maybe it's why I still feel this sense of this maturation that's happening and unfolding through me and through others and through the broader communities and collectives and scenes that we're a part of. But I also think that maybe that's just part of life, and death is part of life. And even in, we could practice our healing and holding for 6 billion lifetimes, and I'm sure there'll still be ruptures and deaths and endings that are challenging and painful. And so, yeah, maybe the question is not how to prevent those necessarily, but how to be in relationship with those, and how does a community and a collective respond wisely, including also psychiatric breaks. Sometimes people just um, for whatever reason, they just psychologically, something, a light switch goes off, or a process of addiction takes over, or something like that. And the person is maybe still there physically, but they're kind of gone. They're on another level, they're not there. And how do you, yeah, stay wisely in relationship with the challenges of something like that? So these are all things I don't have answers for. Or maybe I do, but I don't in this moment. And yeah, they just kind of live in me as humble inquiries, perhaps.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I feel the heart quality of it and resonate with my own heartbreaks and ways that there's a revelatory quality to things. Like we can go through experiences feeling that we're making our life, like we're crafting things and we're fashioning things into something that we have a preconceived plan for. And sometimes things go like that, and sometimes there's a reality check there of um, finding out something had a different trajectory than what I was expecting. And it's not the trajectory is not the problem. It's just my own expectations and kind of miscalibration to things. And I resonate with what you're pointing to multiple times here about having a higher degree of intimacy and interdependence be a sort of fruiting of ongoing practice and relating with each other with the types of skills and encounters that are needed for that thing to be birthed and not sort of rushing into a higher intimacy form with each other or with others. Um, and then realizing that we're ill-equipped or like not properly equipped to be able to tend to it. And that's a dance because then there's the other side of things, which is will we ever be like fully ready or fully mature, and how would we know that? And sometimes we don't know the places that, or speaking for myself, I don't know the places where I'm ill-equipped to be able to handle something that I'm welcoming into my life until I've done that and
Love it.
it's exposed that for me.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And this brings me into a critique I have of sometimes I call it the conscious community or the broader maybe postmodern communities. A lot of I see this a lot in intentional communities. You kind of pointed to this around people coming and going and something that a narrative that I sometimes hear in say some of the Boulder scene that I'm a part of is it's like, oh, I'm just kind of a free bird that's just floating wherever the wind takes me. And, we'll have this moment of connection and it'll be beautiful. But then I'm just going to kind of go over here and do my own thing. And like, there's no expectations of me coming back or having any type of ongoing connection, but maybe I will. And it's this very momentum, like living life moment to moment with kind of no agreements about the future other than there are no agreements about the future. And it's very yeah, I'm doing this with my hands. It just feels kind of like wishy-washy, perhaps. And that's a beautiful way to live life. Like, you go to a festival and you just kind of explore and you follow your bliss and you just kind of allow life to take you wherever it does. And it feels like a mystery and it's this game. And that doesn't work so well when you have a newborn baby and, like that you can't. There's other contexts in your life where when you're in the military, for example. You can't just be like, oh, I think I'm gonna go onto the battlefield today, but I'm kind of tired now, so I'm actually not gonna show up. It's like wake the fuck up and get get off your fucking ass. And so now the military is maybe an extreme example of the other end of the spectrum, right? But what is something in the middle that can first off, both honor that there's context in our lives where we need both of those extremes. But then also maybe there's a center of gravity to the culture where we're really committing. We're committing to showing up. We're committing to staying in relationship. We're committing to following through on our word. We're committing to sometimes putting the we before the I or the collective before the individual. Sometimes I don't want to go to that potluck that I said I would go to, but now that it's Friday night, I'm tired. It's been a long work week and I don't want to show up anymore. But you know what? I told my friend on Monday that I would come and I appreciate that relationship and I want to show up. And so maybe I make an agreement with the part of me that doesn't want to go that I'm going to show up for, less time, but I'm gonna be there, fully, whatever it is. And one of the things that the Source Keepers Guild is exploring is around vow-based relationship. Like, what does it mean when you cross certain thresholds of intimacy and relationship where there's the ritual of vow that is
VOW, vow based.
VOW, vow. Like
Love it.
right now we have marriage vows, when you marry one person, but can that happen? Can a version of that happen with friends in a community? Can it happen in a professional relationship. We do have that with contracts. You could say, I'm contracted to play on this sports team for 3 years and I'm going to get paid this much money. But what does it look like when we don't when we're not doing that for a legal reason, or we're not doing that because it's the one person we want to vow commitment to, but then everybody else is just sort of like an object in our lives that we can kind of pick up and put down, whenever we want. And yeah, family is maybe another way where there's often implicit vows to kind of show up for your blood relatives, even if you don't like them or you're frustrated by them. Anyways, my point is that the Source Keepers Guild is exploring what does it look like to create different depths of vow that invite people into a commitment. So right now we're working with folks in a 6 month commitment to go through a journey together as part of the Guild Heart. And we've invited 8 people. We did a ritual. We had each person speak their yes into the middle and invited folks to basically take on the position that there's karmic consequences for not following through with that vow. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to stay in, or if it really doesn't work. Of course, it's not a cult or whatever. But the idea is that by taking on that vow, it's actually changing our relationship to the relationship. It's doing something on I would say even a biophysical level, but also certainly a psychospiritual level that it's almost like creating a hierarchy of prioritizations in our field. And vows, you could say, have power. They have direction to them. They have a grounding solidity and a force field. And so I'm curious about that. I'm curious about how intentional communities can use vow technology or vow rituals to have there be more commitment and depth and um, devotion to a shared project, while then, of course, having concentric circles where people can come and not have, they're just vowing to show up as a guest for, the Thursday night potluck. There's no need to commit to anything more than that. So how can, say, a land-based village project hold the diversity and the multiplicity of the depth of devotion to the project?
Yeah, I I'm so curious to hear about those experiments and what you end up finding because I'm curious about that as well. I'm married, and
Mhm.
so that is a vow and a commitment that I have made. And I really love marriage and what marriage means in my life. And I don't think it's for everybody, and that it is objectively a better way to do relationships or something like that. But I do have this commitment to my wife, to Anna, that um, I know that if I show up well, like clear and in my own sense of security and integrity to the relationship, then um, there's not really an opportunity. There's no reason why we're not gonna be able to cooperate or get along or something. And so this is a person for me who has showed up for me so much and loved me unconditionally and called me into being a better person. It makes my life better. And so why would I walk away from that or, you know, break that connection because I've let myself spiral off into um the very natural rhythms that come up in me of like falling into judgment or discontent, with what's going on, and then that leading into patterns of unhealthy ways of dealing with that in myself and then blaming and projecting and, those types of things, not bringing things forward. And I do now at the same time, like I wouldn't recommend just getting married to anyone, like it needs to be somebody who we feel like when we show up in that way, they show up with receptivity and care and like we're able to be met in that. And
Yeah.
that's not always going to be the case. But at the same time, yeah, I like that I have this soul to travel through life with. It just feels like such a huge one of the biggest blessings in my life. And that vow that we've made to each other has helped us get through some of the hardest periods of the relationship and thus the development that occurred by going through that together. That if we weren't so intentionally committed and, made a public statement and invited friends and family to use resources to help us anchor that in, um, know each other's families, then when things get that hard, it's kind of easy to just choose to move on and say, well, this wasn't the right situation and kind of move to the next one. But there's something developmentally that I feel I would be depriving myself from. Like there's certain experiences and developments I can only have by making those types of vows and sticking to them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And maybe there's different depths of vow as well. When I think sometimes when people hear the word vow, they think of a marriage vow and then they think, oh my God, I can't possibly imagine having that much responsibility and commitment and intimacy with 10 people. I can barely have enough time in my life for one person at that depth. And so, yeah, this is the possibility. And maybe it's different words than vows. Maybe there's other terms that need to be created that can define what's it like to commit to intimacy, to commit to relationship, to commit to showing up through thick and thin, for, yeah, for a certain period of time. Also, things don't need to be lifelong. They can be like, can I show up to you as a colleague in my life? It doesn't even mean that we're friends, that we're sharing our deepest secrets with each other or something like that. No, there's different shapes of vow, just like there's different shapes of belonging and community that we've been talking about. And I think my sense is that our children, when they're my age or our age, will this will just be so second nature to them, and they'll be like, yeah, of course, But right now we're in this stage of needing to invent it or reinvent it, or look to our ancestors for wisdom, or look to the future as what's actually needed for the unique context of our modern and postmodern age that we're in right now.
Totally. Another word that comes up for me is oath.
Yeah,
And, oath is I took certain oaths when I joined the Air Force and I was project managing an archive for the work of a Sufi teacher in the lineage that I've been initiated in for a number of years. And you talked about work contracts. So the people who were working on that project with me, I instituted a pledge and an oath, and there was a archivist pledge that was uniform that we all took by way of working on the project, and then there was like this personal purpose statement of each of us feeling into like what is our purpose in the world and how is that fulfilled by my work
yeah,
and the role that I'm playing in this project that we're working on together. And part of the oath was that should I at some point feel that I'm no longer fulfilled by the role that I'm holding on this project, I will either seek to renegotiate the role that I'm in forthrightly or exit the project. So it's sort of setting up this expectation of in order to be here and working on this, the only reason or the most core reason for doing it is because it's important to you and your own unfoldment.
yeah,
And it's natural for that to go, to maybe not be constant or for that to feel like that for a certain amount of time and then for it to shift and you to feel less fulfilled. But then what's our oath or what's our vow at that point? When you were talking about the potluck story, I sort of thought about showing up for not showing up
Mm,
and learning that in my life that, okay, I've made a commitment to somebody that I'm going to do this thing. And also, I'm a human with a
totally.
complex life and lots of things going on. And so it's natural for me to need to break a commitment sometimes or renegotiate a
Right.
commitment. But I want that to be a renegotiation. I want to show up to that person and let them know part of what accountability means to me is I know that we made a commitment. I'm tracking that I made a commitment and you're expecting something from me, and that means something to me. And I want
Yeah.
to explain to you why I feel like I need to make a different decision at this point in time and hear from you what could the renegotiation now look like that would meet your needs without me having to white knuckle through this commitment or pull away from you and avoid in shame, you know?
Exactly. And this is where the language can be helpful because, say, for that potluck example, if I'm invited to a local event that is just an event that's part of the larger scene, I actually don't feel a need to say, "Oh, I can't come," or "I want to read it." It's just no. I'm just one of the many people that are part of the scene. I was invited in this mass WhatsApp group to do this thing, and I either show up or don't show up. But if I'm a part of a collective, like maybe for example, here there's a collective of folks who are in the broader integral space, and there's a bit more intimacy, there's a bit more of a shared field, there's more gatherings where there does it like it matters if people show up or not. Then I feel a sense of, okay, I can't come, I can't make this commitment. I have, I'm sick, but I want to communicate and demonstrate through my embodied actions over time that I do care and I am committed to showing up for this collective. Now, if it's a community, say there's a small men's group that my housemate Danny here has been in a men's group for I think I forget it's like 13 years or some crazy number of years, and if there's seven people that are in a community and two people don't show up and they don't even communicate or they just say, "Hey, I'm tired. I've had a busy week. I don't really want to show up for the group tonight." That doesn't really work because the community is through, intimate bonds of trust and relying on each other to really prioritize the community as this group has so successfully and beautifully done. And so, you know, this is where, but sometimes when people, I notice maybe in myself where I can get a little bit um resentment is way too strong of a word, but something milder than frustrated maybe when I invite people to something, but then people don't show up and they don't communicate. And it's like, well, actually, I haven't really created the intimacy of that relationship that would enable that person to feel as if they should communicate. And it's like basically what I'm trying to say is I'm projecting community desires onto them, but they're really just part of a scene or they're really just somebody in the broader network, but I'm kind of using my own lack of felt sense of intimacy to myself or to life itself, and then kind of frustratingly, yeah, desiring others to fulfill that for me when that isn't actually the structure of our connection.
So wise and so important for people in positions of leadership and power to be aware of that. And I just had this experience with Soul Community Lab where we had our first meeting and we've been holding it like very loose so far and just kind of seeing, how does this want to be over time, partly. And um I noticed that so for the first session, we still had 6 or 7 people show up, like a great showing for our first meeting, and the core group was all there. But I was anticipating twice as many people because of miscommunication signals, basically, right? And so a number of people said they couldn't attend at the last minute, like day of or hour before the meeting, which it was actually really nice that people checked in with me directly. But I was sort of sitting in this feeling of disappointment and mismatched expectations. And it can be easy for me in that position to make stories about other people and um, people's reliability or get discouraged or be like, oh no, this isn't gonna work or because people show up like this or that. But what I realized, I was like, okay, I'm taking this as I didn't give I didn't give enough of a clear signal to folks for how I'd like to be loved in this
Yes.
position.
Yeah.
Uh, and that's fine. That part of that was just through trial and error. And like next time, I'm going to try to strengthen my signal and kind of like clean up some of the expectations that I was leaving in a less clear position. Another example of this is we had a house guest recently, an awesome house guest that we were super excited to host. And Anna and I are pretty dialed in and conscious with our diet right now, which I'm really grateful for because it's not always the case for me. And they wanted to be considerate and showed up with chocolate that they brought. And we kind of keep a no sugar house, and I have a lot of food dependency history and challenges. And afterwards I was like, do I want to start telling people when they come stay with us, like, please don't bring this into my home? And I was like, yeah, I think that's actually what I want to do. It's like
Mhm.
we we want to, I think most everybody really cares deeply about showing respect and sharing space well together and being a good guest. And we're coming from very different, we don't have a coherent culture around that, what it means to do that.
Mhm.
And so I think when we're hosting people, holding space, welcoming people into our home, with the culture that we live in, it's really helpful to just let people know, hey, this is what we're up to, and kind of what it would what we'd like for you to be able to respect,
Mhm.
to be able to for us to be thrilled about having you and have a good experience together. And if any of those things are an issue for us or for an issue for you, just let me know and we'll work out how to do that well together.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Beautiful. And it's, yeah, I really resonate with everything you're sharing. The vulnerability of having to name and communicate what you need, basically, and what you desire. That's yeah, it's such a fundamental practice to all sorts of community and relationship. Yeah. There's a another end of the spectrum to that might be the security that something like a vow commitment creates. Now, of course, that security still is arising within total mystery and not knowing of, what might happen in the very next moment. And that's just an existential reality that we're all or at least most of us are entangled in the sense that we really don't know what the next moment will bring. However, that the quality of committing to somebody or something or a particular container or project or community for a certain period of time can allow us to then show up, say, for that men's group, even when we're exhausted and really grumpy and we're totally not wanting to be there because the group is usually in a group like that or in a group like the Boulder Lighthouse community that I was talking about, there's an understanding and an expectation that we can show up in our wholeness. And our wholeness includes our wounded bits and our tired bits and our the parts of us that don't want to be there. Like it's okay. Now, of course, there's still basic, ethics and agreements for how we show up in certain containers that need to be honored. But there's more. Yeah, it's an interesting paradox in a sense that the deeper the bond of commitment often can create more freedom to fully show up as ourselves, which then can create more potential for a relationship to remain strong through different waves of our expression. And maybe something I see in the myself and as well as in the broader communities that I'm a part of is the sense of the fleetingness of connection because we agree to connect only in certain states or in certain when our energy or our desire is kind of it takes on a particular flavor, and then when that flavor isn't there, basically the connection doesn't happen. But what if the connection can grow strong enough that it can hold many different flavors and forms, and then it can travel through more of time and space together with more consistency and durability that then can deepen the level of intimacy that can then create a field that is self-nourishing and generative and healing just by its very nature, that then can allow us to grow and develop together as well as to stay committed to that original point of connection. So that's maybe easier said than done, but I think that that's part of the art of how we're learning to relate as humans right now.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm just feeling into commitment and do you find yourself in a and I'm curious how you would relate to the statement, and I'm checking how I relate to the statement too. I actually don't want anyone to show up to something for me, like because they've made a commitment to me.
Mm.
Um, I want them to be showing up because it's what they genuinely want to be doing. And I
Hmm.
would still differentiate that from mood. Like it's a deeper sense than mood, or like emotional profile, right? And so part of that is communicating. I do want to communicate feedback to people, and I do that with my wife sometimes where I'll let her know, hey, I'm experiencing you as showing up like this. We had this commitment or this agreement, and then this happened. And unless you want to talk about it with me and come to some kind of repair, if we just move on, like my trust in you is now lowered because of that. And I don't like being in a situation where I don't feel like I have a high level of trust with you. So can we talk about it? And um, so it's not this sense of like, I don't want to have accountability. I do want to have accountability. And also, feels important to me on some level to get into the nuance on it or something and just
Yeah.
and be able to hold it in a way with folks where you, I don't want to be rewarding people for like genuinely overriding their sense of what's good for them in my relationships.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I'm noticing my tendency is to like to play devil's advocates in these with these types of questions.
Great.
But it's more of a game for me than it is coming from a deeper heart or something like that. But yeah, of course. I think the extreme of that is I don't want anyone to be a slave, to me or to anyone else. And, on a relative societal level, I want my Uber driver to show up and pick me up when I call the Uber. I don't want them to just like be like, nah, you know what I mean? And so like how do we remain how there's a level of functionality that I think requires us to, and that functionality serves a deeper role, which is, for example, you know, if somebody has impulses towards gambling or towards criminal behavior or towards unethical sexual contact, sometimes say a structure like religion or a structure like the law can basically enforce a higher order nature on that person that society deems as beneficial for that being, but also beneficial for the whole. And that's that is very fraught in history of having many challenges, but it's also, I think the thing that doesn't get talked about is the trillions and trillions and trillions of instances when that's been genuinely very beneficial and helpful and supportive to somebody's life. when a gang member is arrested and they're put in prison and then they're, brought into a sense of relationship to God, and then they feel like they're serving something larger than themselves that's able to they're able to transmute their tendencies towards criminality into something that can be of service to a larger purpose. And so these are, that happens every day and all across the world, millions of times, and in small ways and in big transformational ways. So I forgot why I was saying all of that, but I guess what I'm saying is that I think it's a balance between when you say, I don't want someone to show up when it's not what they actually want to do, my question is, who is the I that is determining it's not what they actually want to do? Is it their soul? Is it their deep heart? Is it their deep knowing? Is it a wounded part of them that is just having a freak out and just needs to be calmed down? Is it a part of them that is maybe, immoral or is not ethically bound to something beyond its own narcissistic desires? Is it kind of, yeah, is it like a mood or is it a chapter of life? Is it so I think that's important is just distinguishing who is who and in what part of them you could say, or what dimension of them is making these decisions. And I think paradoxically, that's why we need friendships. That's why we need community. That's why we need to be called in and to be loved and to be held through some of these different moments and transitions so that it's not just all on our individual self to figure it out all by ourselves.
A lot of that resonates for me, and I think we're unpacking a lot of facets of like going deeper into something, which I think is important because I think there's a lot of totally healthy, justifiable wounding around commitments and accountability. And
Can I say one more example?
absolutely.
The 12-step program I think is a great example where, you're kind of yeah, you're showing up and you're committing to sobriety, or you're sharing about where you're at authentically in your experience, and you're being held in a loving container that's holding you in the wholeness of your being, no matter where you're at in your journey. And at the same time, you're being called up and called into a certain possibility, and you're being asked to work the steps and asked to connect with a sponsor. And I've been a part of a 12-step um, program in my own way, and it's just been not for an addiction I was working with personally, but it was an incredibly empowering and life-changing experience to be a part of a structure that could hold me when maybe the parts of me were if it was just on me and my individuality, I wouldn't have had the power to become the man that I knew that I could be through the community's holding.
Super well said. Um, I think I want to refrain from continuing to riff on that because we've been going for a while, and I'd love to still talk about place-based community if you have time.
Yes, I have a little bit of time. I also need to pee, so I'm going to be right back.
Awesome. Let's do it. I'll join you.
I'll pause the recording.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe 15 more minutes at most. Is that cool?
That sounds good. That
Okay.
sounds like a hard stop for you.
And it's not hard, but it's what I desire, and I'm naming my desires.
Yeah, perfect.
I have
It's good.
another call shortly after, so I want to get some lunch in.
And I want to I want to know how to love you in the best possible way. If it's absolutely hard and you want me to hold it like that, or if it's we're aiming at that and it could be a few minutes longer. Um, and yeah, segue here. I feel like the territory we just landed in is so rich for me, and I have a desire to be talking about
Mhm.
commitments and accountability more. And it's such a critical thing for belonging, like belonging to something. It implies a certain level of stability and commitment. responsibility. So I'm really appreciate the deep dive on that. And for place-based community, when I read your definition of village, it made sense to me. And I think also in that definition, there was something saying village is a place where two or more tribes live together. And my brain noted that. I was like, oh, I was expecting community to be somewhere in that sentence or something. And and yet I think the distinction that you're pointing to makes sense, like is accurate to the reality definitionally. Um, and our group has taken to using the term place-based community at times. And so I think I was wanting to ask you, how do you see the relationship between village and maybe in particular your vision for this meta-modern regenerative village that you see as your life's work and community?
Hmm. Maybe I'll just read the description. It's only a couple of paragraphs. It might be helpful. Uh,
Awesome.
a village is where all of this becomes place-based. A village is a home, and I guess that was in the context of, okay. Anyways, I'm going to read on. A village is a home for one or more tribes, a land-based community of roughly 40 to 150 plus people living in relationship with each other in the modern human world. It involves a set of agreements and commitments to actually live together, not just gather occasionally, not just share values from a distance, but intimately participate in shared rituals, decisions, resource allocation, and collective governance, all within the daily flow of life. A village can be organized as concentric circles of belonging. At the center, those most deeply devoted to stewarding the vision, radiating outward, residents, seasonal members, visitors, locals, and the wider network. Each ring carries its own depth of commitment, and all are often vital to the mandala of the whole. What distinguishes a village from a mere housing arrangement or co-living space is culture, a shared way of being that emerges from living into a collective story over months and years and decades. Not necessarily a story imposed by a charismatic leader, but a living culture that is continuously co-created by the people and the land. So I don't offer that as the dictionary definition of village, but more of how I relate to the term village. But can you restate your question one more time?
Yes, I'm gonna restate it. And I did, as you were reading that back, thank you. I heard community used in that context, but I think still, I'm still curious to try to constellate it with you and hear your take on it. Um, I'm asking about the relationship between village, community, and tribe, and within when they're present together in a
Yeah.
place-based way.
Yeah, so for me, tribe means something that's maybe different from how tribe is used in broader pop culture, so to speak. Tribe to me means it's probably closest to family. Like it's not something I opt into. It's not like I meet someone on a weekend retreat and then like, oh my God, you're a part of my tribe. It's like your tribe is there might only be two or three people that I feel like are actually a part of my tribe. And it's a felt sense of oh fuck, like I'm actually all in on this person. I'm so deeply responsible for their becoming as my becoming. There's no separation. Like I'm um and so that's maybe I don't know, but I imagine that if I was an Amazonian tribe and I have grown up and born into a group of, say, 40 people that basically live their entire lives together and their survival and thriving is completely interdependent and interconnected on that group of 40 people, then that would be like a tribe, you know? In the modern world, we don't really have that. So most people don't have that. Maybe some unique communities do or some unique subcultures. But for people like myself, we don't really have that. We have our biological family, which many people live thousands of miles away from their biological family. We have our friends, we have our work colleagues, we have people we might go to church or in our sangha. That's about it. And then we have a lot of strangers that we, pass by every day. So I guess to me, I've kind of come to terms with the fact that I probably will never have a tribe in this lifetime that that maybe my kids or grandkids will one day. But I probably won't. I'll probably have a really close-knit family and like a few people that are kind of in my core heart tribe, who I may or may not live with. And then I'll have a community, and the community is more of that community is like the people who are constellated through various depths and degrees in the place space village. I mean, hopefully I'll have many communities, not just the village community, but so village is almost like um, the physical architecture for a collective and a community, and maybe even a small tribe, as well as, of course, biological families that are constellating in that village. Does that make sense or resonate?
Yeah, what I heard you say, but I want to check it and make sure I understood, is village is the technology or shape that a community takes when it's place-based. Is that right?
Can you say that one more time?
Village
Yeah.
is the technology or shape that a community uses or takes
That's a
on
really great way to phrase it.
when
Yeah.
it's place-based.
Yeah, because villaging as a verb has for me, that implies that there's some sort of interdependence of daily life that is being co-lived and co-cultured and co-enacted, and yeah, in a way that's not just again a weekend retreat. It's not a month-long creative residency. It's not, you know, kind of being anonymous neighbors with my suburban, modern neighborhood. It's like actually being intimately entangled with people that are codependent, in some ways codependent, certainly physically codependent on the well-being and the thriving of the place-based village. And villaging also is broad enough to include people who are coming as visitors and people who are there for short periods of time or seasonal or people who have been there for decades. The land, the animals, the more than human world as well.
Beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm wanting to feel into my relationship to that word village, and I notice that I don't use it too much these days,
It's
and
probably a
yet
good thing. I think it's a good thing. I mean, because all these words, tribe, village, community, they're all cheesy as fuck. If I think it's all very cringeworthy in a way, and I recognize that. And also, I don't, um, I think they're particularly cringy when the way that they're used isn't being embodied with how people are showing up. So when I go to a local ecstatic dance here in Boulder and people are like, "Oh my God, this is such a beautiful village." And I'm like, "No, it's not really a village. Like, what are you talking about? I don't know 80% of the people here by their first name. I don't have any intimate bonds with anybody except for maybe, two people. I see you once a week at this dance where we're mostly not interacting or talking. Like, how is that a village? Like, explain to me how that's a village. It's not a village. It's now, I know that people are well-intentioned when they say something like that, and then what they mean to say is like, this is a beautiful way for people to come together that share a resonance and to experience, relationship together. Beautiful. But I think there's ways in which when we use words that are so disconnected from their original, not that there's ever an original meaning, but from maybe more of the root of the where the word has arisen from in previous cultures or contexts, it to me is just a mirror and a representation of how disconnected we are from certain depths and forms of relationship and intimacy and connection and belonging that we both deeply long for, which is why we're using the words probably, but also may not even know how much we don't know. And I say that applying that to myself as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm here. What comes up for me listening to that is the importance of not only using words with definitional integrity and kind of distinctive quality from other related words, but then also being able to communicate what do I mean when I use this word. And I've seen that a lot, definitely in intentional communities where oftentimes people are coming together around a mission statement or an ideology or something, um, and the words attract people to it and the commitment to those concepts and words, but then what it what those words mean to each person and the way that they feel called to embody it becomes different and expresses differently through individuals, which I think is natural. I'm more on the like libertarian, let's let everybody sort of
Yeah.
express how they need to express and let the form sort of, build around that. Um, and but a lot of times that creates a lot of can create a lot of controversy when we feel that I came here for this type of expression, and that's rooted in this really important concept to me and value that I'm holding around it, and I don't feel met in that by people who I'm now in an intimate relationship with.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I have more. I think that I have this sense, and I'm not. Yeah, I think I just want to invite people into a way of relating to reality that um, that might help create a certain alignment, that might bring a certain level of collective coherence, that then might create a certain set of conditions for a particular flavor and depth and quality of intimacy that is essentially love that people really deeply desire and long for. And I have, I guess, more of an appetite for wielding the sword of my perspective taking in order to help potentially bring people closer to that place that I think they actually want to go to. And I think some of the sloppiness of our languaging in our world right now is not helping that. And I think it's creating suffering. And so, yeah, it's coming from a place of care, but also I hold equally at the same time that I'm just making shit up and advocating for it and inviting people to believe what I feel as good make up stuff made up stuff. And
Yeah,
so yeah, that's also true.
maybe I'll say this as my check out from this conversation. And if you feel complete there, if you want to add a checkout, we can transition. Yeah, I really honor that impulse that you have and the way you're acting on it. And from my vantage point, I don't know how many people you'll ultimately be able to constellate around that, but I'm somebody who feels a connection with you and the things that are in your heart and that you're spending your attention on manifesting in the world. And I appreciate the frame, and being able to have a more, it helps me align with you. And through that, I have this sense of our collectives and networks being able to align more together, um, as well. So I receive that gift that you're offering and deeply appreciate it. And it's been really cool to talk with you. And I had a lot of questions, and it was cool to see how we just naturally covered most of the territory that I was hoping we would get to. And I'm still left with so many like follow-up threads to pull on and continue to experiment with and live into. So thanks for being willing to jump on and unpack things and kind of discuss things a little bit further.
Yeah, amazing. I'm really happy to hear, and it's been such a fun experience just to be able to share more. And I loved getting to hear more about your life and your experience weaving through all of this as well. And yeah, I hope this is of service. That's my only intention. It was a service to me to write it and to put it out there. And yeah, it's already kind of brought in some nice moments of connection with people, including yourself. So I'm grateful for that. And yeah. Thanks. Thank you for initiating this call, this dialogue.
Thank you, Tucker. Appreciate you, brother.
Yeah. Talk soon.
Okay, take
All
care.
right. Bye.